D-Lo 404 Boxing. Shout out to the LDBC. Shout out to Marlowe's Corner, Trey X, Whole Block fam. So I want to talk about Terrence Bud Crawford. You know, a lot of talk has been buzzing around about Bud Crawford after the Spence and Porter fight. Some taking what they saw in that fight and using that as you know, motivation, or using that as some kind of precursor to give them an indication of how the Bud Crawford fight versus Errol Spence would play out, or basically using that as ammunition to say, oh, okay, this is why one guy hasn't wanted to fight the other guy, because look at how this fight went, you know. So you know, it's just one of those things when anticipation's out there for two guys to fight, and every time one of them fights someone else that's not named the other guy that we want to see them fight, you're going to have those type comparisons come out. You're going to have those type conversations come about. And it's just the nature of boxing. We saw it for years with Floyd and Manny, when we were being teased about that fight, and it never came to fruition around that time until, you know, some 5 years later. But every time the guys fought, we were talking about the other guy. You know, every time one of them had a fight with someone else, we talked about the other guy, talked about what we saw, talked about how we thought the fight would play out, so on and so on. So, you know, this is no different. But I will say, I have been one of the guys that was like, you know, one of the biggest proponents for Bud having the right, excuse me, to stay in his promotional, you know what I'm saying, situation. He was saying that, hey, he's happy with where he is. We don't know the totality of what kind of compensation this man is getting in terms of his purses, his paydays. We don't know what the situation, what the true arrangements are. All we know is what we read and what we hear. So, you know, I've always said that I understand, if anybody can understand a person not wanting to just go with what everyone else is doing and try to, you know, kind of create their own lane, then I certainly understand that. You know, I've kind of been that way ever since I was a little boy. You know, that I've always wanted to kind of do things my way. You know, if somebody was like, hey man, this is what, you know, this is what we're doing, this is how you do it, it's like, I want to find another way to do it. You know, and sometimes I found out that my way wasn't always the best way, and what everyone else was doing, they were doing it that way because it made sense. You know, and it was easier, and it was safer, or whatever the case may be. So, you know, I've always kind of felt like, you know, that Bud Crawford shouldn't have to sign with PBC to get the fights he wants. You know, that he should be able to stay with Top Rank if that's what he wants to do. And you know, these guys should be willing to fight him, and he should be willing to fight them, and Bob Arum should be willing to fight, you know, or not fight, but work with Al Heyman and make these fights happen. But at the same time, I understand that there's a lot of, you know, you know, different things that have happened between Top Rank and Al Heyman that, you know, make it to where, you know, they're not going to just be willing to just do business together unless it makes a lot of sense. I do think this is a case where it makes sense, but at the same time, I can understand. Because Bob Arum's done some underhanded things, you know, made some, you know, nefarious allegations toward Al Heyman. So I understand Al Heyman not being like, you know, I'm not trying to help Bob Arum. But at the same time, you know, I've said this before as well. I don't know that there's a problem with Terrence Crawford signing with PBC and remaining with Top Rank, because, you know, we've seen PBC fighters sign with promoters and still be PBC fighters, you know, because PBC is not a promotional company. So, you know, that said, you know, I do think that if the fight, if the interested parties want to make the fight, they will make the fight. But I'm starting to get to the point that I'm wondering if this is a fight that's either not going to ever happen, or it's going to happen way past its best by date. Because we definitely, you know what I'm saying, have seen enough of that in the sport, where fights that were ripe and ready to be made didn't get made, and then something happened, and you know, by the time the fight got made, it looked like a totally different fight. I mean, just case in point, I think Manny Pacquiao ended up taking 2 more losses before him and Floyd Mayweather finally got in the ring, and one was a horrible knockout that won Manuel Marquez. Also, you know, we also saw him take a loss to Tim Bradley. You know, whether you agree with the decision or not, that was an official loss. And you know, same thing. One fight that I was looking forward to was the Yuriorkis Gamboa Juan Lopez fight years ago. That Bob Arum insisted on making marinate, letting it marinate a little bit longer, and then Orlando Salido came along and just destroyed. You know, he upset the apple cart. He destroyed that fight from ever being a viable fight when he knocked out Juan twice. So, you know, Gamboa beat Salido, but he wanted to put. I think what it was Juan fought Rogers, I think his name Rogers in Mtagua, and beat him, and then Gamboa beat Salido, and then it's like they switched opponents. Salido fought Juan, and then Gamboa fought Mtagua, and Gamboa passed the test, and Juan didn't. And then that was it. That fight, you know, never materialized. It was never even close to being a viable fight again. So I definitely don't want to see a situation like that, or even like the Pacquiao Mayweather fight. Even though that fight was huge, biggest fight ever in boxing, I don't think the fight it was what it would have been in terms of action, or even in terms of how big the fight was. I think that you know, a lot of people think that the fight got as big as it was because of all the anticipation. But I do think by the time it happened that a lot of people that would have bought the fight were turned off by it and didn't buy it. You know, so I mean, it could have been even bigger earlier. Who knows? You know, all we can go by is that we got it when we got it, and the result was what the result was. You know, in the ring, as well as in terms of the revenue it brought in, and in terms of the attention they brought to the sport. And the bad thing about that fight was that it brought a lot of eyes to the sport, but at the same time, I think it turned the way the fight played out turned a lot of eyes away from the sport. So I don't know that Spence versus Crawford would ever be in jeopardy of turning eyes away from the sport. I don't think that the way those two guys fight, the temperament, you know, the aggression they fight with, the ring intelligence they fight with, I don't think that fight could ever turn fans away from the sport. But I think him hawing around about making a fight can turn fans away from the sport, because, you know, fans are the consumer, and they're not getting what they want. There's always a possibility that they may say, okay, you know, I can just go watch MMA and leave this boxing alone, or I'll just stick to watching football, basketball, baseball, whatever. So, you know, that's the way I feel about it. I think this fight needs to happen sooner than later, and I think as the fighter who is, you know, quote unquote on the wrong side of the street in Bud Crawford, I think that the onus is on him to figure out what it is he needs to do, because he come out and said that he can't make Bob Arum make the fight, or whatever the case was, or he can't make these guys fight him or whatever. But I think he needs to start trying to figure out what it is he needs to do to get the fight, make the fights happen that he wants to see happen, because at the end of the day, he is the older fighter, and he, you know, presumably is the guy who's going to be out of the sport first. And he's made comments about not needing the fight, that, you know, he don't need Spence and he can be a Hall of Famer without Spence, so forth and so on. You know, whether that's right, wrong, indifferent, be that as it may, why would you not make sure that this fight happens? Because, you know, you talked about it, you talked about wanting to fight, you talked about you can beat this man, you know, so forth and so on. You know, and he also made the comment that, you know, even had, you know, Spence lost to Porter, he still wanted the Spence fight. So that said, show and prove. You know, go out there and do what you got to do to make this fight happen. And you know, boxing, as well as both guys, I think will be happy that the fight did happen. I still think that this is the biggest fight that either guy can be in, even with both guys having the potential to have Manny Pacquiao fights. I think that the fight with one another, because they're both close, much closer to their prime than Manny Pacquiao is. Both guys undefeated, and you know, for a lot of people, that undefeated record makes them, you know, tune in and watch the fight. You know, they're gonna say, oh, these guys are both undefeated. You know, and I think that you know, and that's, you know, certain people who really look at these records as if that's all that it is to the fighter, is their record, which couldn't be further from the truth. So I'm hoping that the fight happens soon. I think Bud Crawford needs to turn up the pressure on his promoter. I think he needs to be more vocal. I think he needs to start doing interviews with the people who, truly support him, and stay out of the face of people like Joe Rogan, who, are agenda driven, and, really, do what he has to do to put some momentum behind his efforts to get this fight made. And even if not just a Spence fights with guys like Danny Garcia and other guys that are on the PBC side of the street that could really bolster his luster at 147. But that's all I got to say about it. It's D-Lo 404 Boxing. Once again, shout out to the LDBC, my subscribers. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe. I'm out. Peace.